Record. Oh, yes. Thank you. I was gonna forget to do that. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to the July 2024 at home of the 19th Century Dress and Textiles Reframed Network. I'm Nico. I'm the intern for the group, and I'll also be the chair for the event. So as mentioned on the Eventbrite, this is a sort of writing workshop dedicated to book publishing. So we have 5 lovely committee members who are going to be talking about their books and the sort of process from the proposal, writing, marketing, and promotion. So they'll go around and introduce themselves, but it's Robyne Calvert, Hilary Davidson, Lynn Hulse, Suzanne Rowland, and Kate Strasdin. So this is going to be the first in a 2-part series, with this session focused on sort of book publishing, and then a session in the near future, which will be dedicated to publishing sort of smaller works like journal articles, book chapters, and the like. So as mentioned on the Eventbrite, for the sake of organization, the session's going to be split into 3 different sections. The first is going to be on topics and proposing. It's going to be 20 minutes each section, and then we'll have a 10-minute Q&A afterwards. The second section is going to be on writing, and then the last section is going to be on marketing and promotion. So we just ask that you stay muted sort of as the conversation is happening, and then when you have a question, put it in the chat, and then I'm going to be going through and asking the questions to our wonderful panel. So yeah, without further ado, we can get started. I'm just going to have each of our speakers alphabetically introduce themselves and say the title of their book, a little bit of a description, and then from there, we're going to go into the first section. So Robyne, if you want to start us off.
Sure, I was multitasking a little bit. Sorry.
It's okay.
Managing the show. So yeah, I'm Robyne Calvert, and what was I have to say? What am I doing? Sorry, I was hosting. Doing
Yeah, just your name, the title of your book, a very short description about it. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so my book is called The Mack, Charles Rennie Mackintosh and the Glasgow School of Art. And I guess it's a fun one to launch with because it is the non-fashion book in this pile. I call myself a cultural historian these days because I wear many, many different hats in what I do. And so it's a architectural and design history, but really what it is a biography of a building, of the Mackintosh Building at the Glasgow School of Art, which might be unfamiliar. I would not be surprised if a lot of you have no idea what that is, but some of you will know that it's a very, very famous building that also very famously caught on fire twice and was destroyed the second time. And I was the Mackintosh Research Fellow at the Glasgow School of Art, and I was part of the restoration project and worked on it alongside the design team. And my book was supposed to be a celebration of the building being rebuilt and reopened, and then it was destroyed. And so now it is a bit of a book that remembers the building and talks about the possibilities of what next, and talks about the conservation project, and talks about the history of it, and looks at problems around conservation, how we view the built environment, and how we interact with buildings, and has oral histories and all kinds of stuff. And yeah, there's some fashion in there too. How is that? And it was really hard and traumatic to write. There we go. That's a nice little nutshell for me.
That was perfect. Hilary, if you want to go off of that.
Hi, I'm Hilary Davidson. I'm the chair of the MA in Fashion and Textile Studies at the museum. No, sorry, not at the museum, at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. And the book I'm going to be talking about tonight is my first book, Jane Austen's Wardrobe, which is looking at Regency dress for men and women worldwide. It goes from Britain out to worldwide through the lens of Jane Austen's life and writing. I have followed it up with Jane Austen's Wardrobe, but I'll be sort of concentrating on Dress in the Age of Jane Austen tonight. So that came out in 2019 with Yale University Press.
Okay, thank you. Lynn, if you want to go next.
Hi, I'm Lynn Hulse, and my book is entitled Reviving the Art of Embroidery, Lady Victoria Welby and the Founding of the Royal School of Needlework. I was archivist at the Royal School between 2004 and 2010, and the institution celebrated its 150th anniversary in 2022. I'm self-publishing my book, so we can talk about what that entails, which is different from going with a recognised publisher. But I'm looking at the early history of the institution between around 1872 to 1880. And it's based on a private archive of Lady Victoria Welby's papers, and it's very exciting research, and I shall be very glad when it's finished, which I hope will be within the next few weeks. I certainly need to get it published at the end of this year, beginning of next.
Okay, thank you. Suzanne, if you want to go next.
Thanks, Nico. I'm Suzanne Rowland. I'm a lecturer in fashion and dress history at University of Brighton. The area that I research most is really the kind of Edwardian turn of the century period, 1890 to 1920. I'm currently writing a book for Bloomsbury, which is about manufacturing of blouses during this period. But what I'm going to talk about in this session is my first book, which I wrote 9 years ago, and it's called Making Edwardian Costumes for Women. And it's a capsule or wardrobe collection of eight projects and some accessories from local museums close to where I live, Worthing Museum and Brighton Museum. So it features like a history of the period, but it also features step-by-step instructions to reproduce garments from the museum. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. And I wrote this for the Crowwood Press, so they're a small independent publisher, so I can talk about remaking and working for smaller publishers.
Thank you. And then Kate, if you want to finish us off.
Hi, my name is Kate Strasdin. I teach at Falmouth University, Senior Lecturer in Cultural Studies at Falmouth in Cornwall. I'm talking today about my book, The Dress Diary, which was published last year by Chatto and Windus and Vintage in paperback. My first book was my PhD publication, which came out in 2016 with Bloomsbury, which was about the wardrobe of Queen Alexandra. So quite different topics. And my first book was at academic press, second book a commercial press. So quite an interesting contrast between the two different versions of particularly from a marketing perspective. So that's me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. We're going to start with a pretty basic question, just of where the idea for your topic came from. Was it previous work experience, a long-term interest, maybe a smaller publication, an object or a collection? And did you feel you sort of needed to change your topic at all to make it more marketable or more suitable for a book? So feel free to answer if you want.
I'll jump in. I wrote this book because it didn't exist, basically. I'd been working on Jane Austen's Police, and so I'd been doing a lot of research around Regency dress, and I kind of realized that what I think of in my head is the big book of Regency dress. There wasn't one, and for a period that was so popular, I realized that, you know, lots of books went up to sort of 1800 or started in 1800, or they touched on it in other areas. So I wrote the book that I wanted to find on the shelves, and because I've been working on Jane Austen and she's so associated with the period, I thought she was a natural way in. So for me, it was kind of filling a gap, and it all just proceeded very logically from there.
I can contrast with that in the sense of my book did actually exist, but it was suddenly out of date. So it arises from a research project, really. I'm going to try to make this a more generic sort of thing, since it is architecture overall. But it was time to revise and update the subject, and also because this building was going through what originally was a positive transformation, but then in the middle of it became a not so positive transformation. So it actually had a lot of transitions, and just because other people mentioned it at the start, and I did work with Yale on this, and they were incredible in like being flexible and supportive throughout this kind of really dramatic sequence of events that happened throughout the life of my project. So I was excited. It was going to be very different in the beginning, in that it was just going to be a lot of pictures and there was going to be an edited volumes of essays about the project, but then it changed and I ended up having to write what was, and it turns out quite an emotional work. Oh, and can I just be self-aggrandizing for a minute? It's been shortlisted for the Society of Architectural of Historians medallion, the Russell Hitchcock medallion. So I just found out, and that's just become public. And as my lovely colleagues here know, I went through a lot of anxiety thinking I was a terrible writer too doing it. So so anyway, I'm going to stop, but I just thought I'd mention that because you start a project sometimes, then you have no idea where it's going to go and what's going to befall it as it goes on. So there's a lot of change.
Well, my book started off really being a history of the whole of the Royal School of Needlework, because that was what I was asked to write after I'd edited the Handbook of Embroidery for the school. But sadly, the collections department closed, so that project got put on hold. But while I was there, I was very fortunate in being introduced to a descendant of Lady Victoria Welby, who still owned all her private papers relating to the institution. So I got access to 2,000 letters, which covered the early history of the school. And given that the school archive is really quite depleted in terms of its early records, there are very, very few committee minutes from that very early period. This was an absolutely amazing archive to be working on. So it was a bit of a no-brainer that the subject of the book was going to change from 1872 up to the present day to now 1872 to 1880, the period in which Victoria Welby was associated with the institution. And it's been a great subject to work on because it means that I'm sort of dabbling in the development of the decorative arts in a really interesting period, looking back to Gothic revival, design reform movement, looking forward, looking at aesthetic movement and looking forward to what we think of as the arts and crafts movement. So it's been an enormous subject. It has drawbacks being self-published, but we can talk about that later on. But it also has some freedoms involved in that as well.
But mine wasn't a plan, actually. I wrote it because an opportunity was presented to me. The publishers had just taken over a smaller press, and their most successful title was a remaking title. I think it was Medieval Dress, and they were looking to expand. And a friend of mine who's a curator who doesn't sew was approached. They were looking for people with knowledge of particular periods, and he passed it on to me. He said, look, you could do this. And I thought, no, I could never write a book. But then I found myself putting a proposal together, and because my MA dissertation had been about Edwardian blouses, that's the period I knew about. And so I came to write this Edwardian book. And also I kind of wanted to highlight everyday clothes in museums, and maybe kind of look at what working class people were wearing. And I had grand ideas, but the reality is when you come to research it and when you talk to a publisher, it kind of takes a different shape, perhaps.
Mine started out, is all about a single object that came into my possession. So an album that just seemed to have the potential to act as a kind of micro-history out of which the stories evolved concerning the people that were actually, or the person that wrote this album, the people that featured inside it, and then the themes that kind of emerged from the fabric swatches and the captions that were written in the book. So the book dates from, it starts in the 1830s and goes through to the 1870s. And so really it was a kind of, it's a biography of the object, but also of the people that appear in it, and then the journey of the album from the north of England to London to Devon, but it also became a bit of a story about my research journey because it took place through the pandemic. So I wrote the book during all through 2020, and yeah, so it's kind of, it is dress history, but as much as anything, it's a kind of social biography.
Thank you. So some of you already mentioned this, your publishers, so it seems fitting to go into how you found the right publisher or how they came to you. Some of you mentioned. Then if Lynn, if you want to talk about self-publishing, why that was the route you decided to go, and how like your process maybe changed as a result. Were there maybe other publishers you were trying to look at? Yeah, open to anyone to answer.
Can talk about, oh, sorry,
on,
Kate, you
Suzanne.
go.
Well, no, I was only going to say it's mine's interesting in as much as for anybody that's thinking about routes into potential routes into publishing. Mine came via social media, and so I quite a few years ago now, 7-8 years ago, started to take social media a bit more seriously in terms of Instagram and Twitter, as was mainly because I live in a very rural area in the UK and I didn't live near any of my peers. So it felt that that was a route through to making some networks and forging some kind of connections. And it was via that. So an agent who followed somebody that followed me on Twitter, found my feed and enjoyed the content. And she contacted me and said, would you like to write a book, and have you got some ideas? And so I presented her with the ideas, and then she pitched the idea that she liked the best, which was the dress diary, to publishers, and then it was purchased by Chatto. So that's, I think, what's interesting about the commercial, you know, compared to my experience with Bloomsbury, where it was about writing the proposal. And I did have to write a proposal, but that proposal was kind of taken off my hands by the agent, who then circulated it, and that's how it worked for me. So it's quite an interesting route, going through that sort of quite a big publisher and how they ended up tackling it.
Well, with mine, so I mentioned that it landed on my lap. The first thing I did was to write an initial email to the editor, and I think this is normal, and I've done this for all 3 of my books, just to say, this is my idea, are you interested? And then they kind of, you know, will send back how they would like to receive a proposal. So the Crowood Press, they're a family-run business. They're in rural Wiltshire in the UK. They publish about 80 books a year, and they're very much for hobbyists and enthusiasts, but also professionals. So it's been surprising to me, you know, who's been interested in what I've written. And the person that I contacted was the editor, Rachel Allen, who overlooks it's called the dressmaking section. So it's quite general, you know, it covers knitting, all kinds of hobbies and things like that. So they're very much a kind of a formula that you write to, but with some scope to add your own interests as well.
I kind of thought about, I had a very clear vision for the book and what it looked like and what kind of book it was going to be. So I sort of went, which publisher work best matches, you know, the vision of the book that I had in my head, and for me it was Yale. So Yale was my first choice, and I'm very lucky that they were interested. But I did go through, like Suzanne, I emailed an editor, but I asked for an introduction from a colleague who already published with Yale, who introduced me to her editor. And I've been asked a number of times for, you know, similar introductions, and I think that's important as well, of kind of collaborating with your network, and, you know, connecting people up there too. So again, like Suzanne, I did the initial email, and then I sort of did a a short proposal, which I then built up into a longer proposal. I read a lot on the internet about how to put a book proposal together from a lot of sources, but I couldn't find anything, a template or anything. So I made my own, and I'm just going to put a link in the chat. On my website, if you scroll down, I've actually got a template for putting an academic book proposal together that you can anyone can download if that's at all useful, because I found nothing, so I made my own form. But I feel I went quite a sort of a traditional way, and I know I'm very lucky that I got in straight away with the publisher that I thought would do well with the book, and it did, and I'm super happy. But I'm really lucky. So
I'm going to echo Hilary on the lucky, because I did have a really sexy sellable topic. A burned building is a pretty big, yeah. And we've talked about that with the Jane Austen and burned buildings. We were lucky in a way, grimly in my case, but what might be useful. So actually, because of that, the director of the school had been approached by Thames and Hudson and set up a meeting with me. But meanwhile, the editor who I ended up working with from Yale had been visiting Glasgow till they were relaunching a updated version of the Glasgow Pesner Guide. And so it was somebody who was like, he's in town, by the way, come say hi. Also, because I would give tours of the building. So it was a networking opportunity, but so I went and I met him, knowing I was already going to have this meeting with Thames and Hudson. And but I wanted Yale also, much like Hilary, same kind of situation. And I come out of art history originally, and it's kind of the little dream to publish with Yale. And so I was just a bit bold, and I said, well, I'm definitely writing a book on this, but I'd like it to go to you. And he said, let's definitely talk about that. And the fact that there was another publisher interested kind of up to, and I did meet, what was interesting was I did go down to London, and I had, on the same day I met with both of them. And when I met with Thames and Hudson, they kind of wanted a different book. They were like, well, we'd love to just do a book on Charles Rennie Mackintosh. Can you do that? And I'm like, but you already published the best book on Charles Rennie Mackintosh by Alan Crawford. It was written however many years ago, but I still use it. It's a great book. And for me, that was really weird. So I was in an incredibly fortunate position almost to be a bit bullshit and say, this is the book I want to write. And Yale wanted that book. So I got very, very lucky. But it was definitely through the networking and through being bold enough to ask questions, because, and I should say this is my first book, by the way. I'd not published a book before. So when I did have to still do a proposal and give them a writing sample to show them I could write. So I didn't just get handed it either. But I did kind of like get a little brave, because I was definitely intimidated to do all of that. And I'm a good fake it till you make it type of girl. So I would say, if you've got an exciting topic, that is very lucky, but you can still make these connections, I think, through, like Hilary said, that networking. And I know and certainly Hilary, because she's just proved it, all of us here are very much like, how can we help people open that door? I've now introduced my colleagues to the same editor. So that, I think that's really important. So.
Well, like the others, yes, I did approach by email a couple of publishers and had really good discussions with them. They were really interested in the book. But what concerned me was they both offered a very short print run of 300. And the price point for the book was going to be very high. Plus, I was going to have very, very few pictures in the book. And for somebody who writes about decorative needlework, that wasn't ideal. Plus, writing about an institution that has had hundreds of thousands of people go through its doors, having a print run of 300 was not going to really cut it. And also, I wanted it at a price point that I thought people were prepared to pay, not a book that was going to cost 90 to 110 pounds to sell. So I decided in the end that this way I could write the book that I wanted. I also got in contact with the owner of the collection of papers that I was working on to say, how do you feel about this? Because his family actually had run a major publishing enterprise for a number of years. And I sent him a copy of one of the books that I had edited, a volume of essays, and he came back and said, I think this looks great. Please go ahead with it. So he sanctioned it. So that was great news from my perspective. Just to add to what Hilary said about proposals, I would strongly recommend this, which I wish I had discovered when I started writing this book. I'll write the title of it in the chat. But Laura Portwood-Stacer's book on the book proposal book is absolutely fabulous. I have used it, even though I'm not sending in a proposal to a book publisher for this particular publication, but I just found in terms of structuring the work and thinking about, have I ticked all the boxes in terms of who this book is for and how I'm structuring it, this is perfect.
Because I think there's you know, that what you mentioned there as well, Lynn, about the short print runs and the high cost. You know, I think we'll talk a little bit about the difference between the academic and the trade publishing, but you know, the market that you're pitching to and how it's gonna be, who's gonna read it, who has access to it. It's big factors in making decisions about where you want to even sort of approach the book. Yeah, and they're kind of fundamentally different approaches of the trade, like Kate's, and you know, the sort of the strict end of academic publishing. Yeah.
And I would just add to that quickly that that can be determined by your you know, by your employment, because if you're working in certainly UK academia, I don't know so much about American academia, but we have to publish outcomes that go into the REF, which is the Research Excellence Framework in the UK. And you know, our research, whether we have a research and teaching contract or just a teaching contract, can depend on what our ref output, our refable outputs are. And so often we are kind of very mindful that things that might be considered not academic enough won't be put forward for the ref. So that can be, if you're teaching, that can be something that really influences what you choose to publish as well, or what you think you need to publish.
Fantastic. So we are at the 20-minute mark for our first section, so we can go into the Q&A. Feel free to just put your question in the chat if you want to do a general question for all of the speakers, if you want to direct it to one speaker in particular. Yeah, just put it in the chat, and then I'll be going through to answer them. Thank you to Hilary and Lynn, who mentioned, Hilary, the proposal sort of format template that you have on your website, and Lynn, the book as well. That's very, for someone who's a student right now, that's very helpful to know that there are these things that are available to us. It's not, it's just very nice to know that we're being supported by successful scholars in the community. That's lovely. Okay, so Chris asks for Lynn, what sort of distribution have you planned for your self-published book? There are so few distributors left.
Yeah, that is a bit of a problem. I haven't really fully addressed. What I would say is that I'm not too concerned about the distribution aspects, because obviously being associated with the Royal School of Needlework, which has thousands of students and followers, you know, providing that I am good about going through the social media, getting the book reviewed and so on, I think it will sell without too much difficulty. But it is an area that is the problem when you are self-publishing from a distribution point of view. So it really means that you need to pound the streets in terms of social media, getting out there, giving lectures, organising to get interviews about the book. And I'm very conscious of that. And I'm currently looking into what one can do, you know, in terms of radio, in terms of trying to interest art programs in the subject, because it's a sexy subject. You know, it's about a woman who's from the aristocracy, who's very successful. It's women's history. It's about a period that people want to hear about. It's also a subject that has been under-researched, and there are lots and lots of great anecdotes and also lots of wonderful embroideries associated with that particular period, some of which have come out of the woodwork that have never been seen before. So it's got lots of things to sell it. So we can talk a bit more about, you know, what one needs to do in terms of promoting a self-published book a bit later on. I think the first thing I would say is it's a big financial investment, and you've got to think about that if you're going to go down this route, because you've got to have the money up front to publish the book, and you've got to think about, are you prepared to set that money aside? Are you in a position to do that? Very fortunately, I am in a position to do that, and unlike many of the others who are here who've got academic posts who are dependent on going with particular presses because of REF, I am not locked into that, so I can take a bit more of a relaxed view about it. But I have lectured extensively in the UK and in the US about this book, so I've worked very hard to already promote it, but I'm aware there's an awful lot more to do on that subject.
Thank you, Lynn. So Ben in the chat asks, are there any literary agents you recommend reaching out to for fashion history focused books, just as it is considered more of a niche and is often not taken seriously as a sphere of study?
I'm going to answer this, but I'm hoping Kate will as well. I looked into agents kind of during the process of writing the books, and I kind of came to the conclusion I ended up with an agent for a future book. I'm developing a future book with an agent, but again, like Kate, they found me after the first book. And my feeling is that, again, it's worth contacting people who have published fashion history books with an agent, because I feel like it's more down to sometimes the individual agent and what they're interested in nurturing and developing maybe than the agencies themselves. And I feel like this is a kind of a more of a word of mouth thing. But Kate, I know you've got a lot more experience in this.
Yeah, I think it's right. I don't think there is there are obviously specific presses who have been really pushing fashion history as an agenda. So Bloomsbury, for example, have been for the last couple of years really trying to expand their dress history list. And therefore you have an editor like Frances Arnold at Bloomsbury, who is, you know, she actively encourages people to submit proposals, and she's very interested, but that's for a very specific kind of, you know, that is the academic press. As far as agents are concerned, they tend to, so my agent, for example, is she's called Claire Alexander for Aitken Alexander, and she, I think, having been an editor for a long time with a large publisher, she had reached a point in her career where she was just interested in picking subjects that interested her. So in a much more broadly non-fiction sense. So I'm not aware of an agent that's specifically working in just the field of dress history. But if you look at, so if you're interested in a trade publication, what I was doing before actually Claire contacted me was having a look at, so find a book that you think is a really successful version of something that a book that you admire, and find out who their agent is. Then go to the publisher's website. They will always list their agents. If you go to an agent's website, underneath each individual agent, it will list what their areas of interest are, so you can see if your suggestion might be a good fit for them. So that's the route I would go down if seeking an agent is something that you would like to do, is start with the book that you admire, find who their agent is, and then look at the agency and see, because there are multiple agents in each agent, and there might be another agent that turns out to be a better fit for what you're proposing. So yeah, I think that would be my suggestion from a trade perspective. But it's that endless kind of, do you approach an editor first or an agent first? You know, it's a bit chicken and eggy when it comes to trade output.
Thank you. Yeah, that actually leads us into one of the questions. We only have time for this last one, and then I'm mindful we have to move on to the next section. So quickly, if anyone wants to answer, Mary Kay asks, you talked about meeting with publishers and agents, any do's or don'ts you should keep in mind for meetings with publishers and agents.
I'll jump in quickly. Lots of them, unfortunately, that book probably has good advice in it. I would say, I think a lot of people think they have to have like the whole book written or even the whole proposal written before they talk to somebody, and that is not the case. However, you should have a very clear vision about what it is that you would like to do, at least. And I would do a little research on the scope in the field, which is one of the questions that's always in a book proposal about like, what are the competing titles here? Because I think the most important thing you have to do, and I remember reviewing a friend's proposal who'd self-published loads and could not get an academic contract. And when I read his proposal, I was like, well, you're not making it very sellable. It's all very niche. You have to remember that these are people who want to sell something and make some money. They'll get excited about your amazing idea, but you have to think about it from their perspective. So be very clear about what it is that you want to write. I would say, like, obviously you need to have a good pitch on your proposal. Have some kind of writing sample at least available for them to look at to show that, you know, what your writing style is like and you can write. But importantly, be aware of the field, and you have to remember a little bit about, you have to tell them a bit about like, well, why is this a good book? Where does it fit? Why do you think it'll sell? I hate to say it, but I feel like those are some really big do's. And a don't is send them the whole book. Or something. I would say don't send them too much information either. You know, there's an inquiry stage. So that's what I wanted to spit out really quickly. I don't know if other folk want to.
Can I just jump in? There's one thing that I would just Robyne saying that made me think that overwhelmingly I've had positive experiences, but be careful if you have a really good idea, that you don't just go to a publisher and pitch a load of great ideas and then never hear from them again. And then suddenly, this has happened to me, where I was much younger, I was very green with this. I went to quite a big publisher at their invitation, pitched them a load of ideas. They said, oh yeah, great, we'll think about those. And then lo and behold, about 18 months later, a book that I had suggested popped up with one of their editors that had actually edited it. So, you know, that's on me. I didn't, well, it's on them as well, but I didn't. So, you know, don't be mindful of your communications. Don't be so enthusiastic that you give everything away in a bid to sell them the idea, or at least make sure that you have an email trail that shows what your I had quite a few telephone conversations, and so yeah, just maintain your own intellectual property. I think that's important.
Okay, I think for time, we're going to move on to the second section, which is on writing. I think it'd be fitting to start this section just by asking how you got over sort of the hurdle of writing, because in my mind, writing a book is very daunting. So, or even if you didn't find it difficult, if it was the easiest step of the process. Yeah, answer that.
Oh, sorry. Can I suggest a source that helped me a little bit with writing? I'll just pop it in the chat. It's a book called Murder Your Darlings by Roy Peter Clarke, and it's just about getting over the hurdle. So one of the things he suggested, you know, we've got these ideas in our head, is that you sketch it out in a way that you're writing that no one will read it. It's just for you. You kind of dump it all on, you know. I wrote the outline for my current book on a long train journey. It's kind of chapter by chapter. I had nothing with me, but I just poured it all out. And he calls this a zero draft, you know, and it is, I find it useful as the basis to then build on. So kind of get the ideas down and then go back into where you've got the research for and what interests you most. And kind of, that's my way of working anyway.
Something I found really helpful, but I didn't realize how helpful it was till I'd got to the end and after conversations with friends who are also writing books, is I was really clear about the structure of the book in my head. I knew exactly what each chapter was going to be. I knew what the kind of the bones of the book were going to be. So that when I was researching it, I found that really helpful to go, okay, this goes in chapter 4, this goes in chapter 7. And to have you know, in writing an article or something smaller, when it doesn't have a clear, you know, base narrative, it's much harder. And I think, like Robyne was saying, that kind of really knowing what your book is, can help as you write, rather than trying to sort of research, write, organize the material. But again, that's sort of, you know, that might maybe come with like a bit of tinkering around, a bit of playing. But if you can get what each chapter is about and how that's going to go really early on, I think it just streamlines a lot of things, because you're not having to spend a lot of time making decisions as you're writing. You can kind of be aiming at a point. But I don't know how that fits with other people's experiences.
Yeah, I'd agree, Hilary, because it's so easy to get sort of bogged down in the whole structure of writing. And also, if it's, you know, you're coming up with a lot of new research, oh my goodness, you can get bogged down in having 10 examples where, you know, 1 or 2 might do. So it's really important to get structure. I mean, mine is very much from a chronological point of view of the history of what's going on. So it's been quite easy in a sense to find those coat hangers for each chapter. And it's got 2 big chapters, which are 2 major exhibitions, which, you know, the story of the school kind of hangs on. So that's been relatively easy to structure. But I'm the sort of person, I love doing the research. God, I hate the writing process because I'm the perfectionist, and you know, that's not good. And I'm sure there are others here who would say being the perfectionist is not a great thing. But I think, like Suzanne, I would agree that just get it down in some overarching way. I have found actually having to give, I've just had to write an online course, for instance, which covers the period that my book covers, and that's been great because it means then you can really stand back and have a look at the high level of a subject, and it gives you those coat hangers from which to, you know, build up the material that you need for each of the chapters. I'm also a great one for mind mapping. I find that that's really helpful. I love colored pens. I love doing chapters in bullet points. I find that helps tremendously. So I write each chapter as a series of bullet points, and then I flesh it out because I know that I've got all the material that I want to include, and also I can jettison the bits that I just don't need to have there.
Writing is hard, and like really hard. And now I've got this wonderful new role, and I'm teaching writing a lot to undergrads and postgrads. And let me tell you what I have finally learned about writing that I always knew, but I never learned until I actually wrote a book, and that is drafts. I think I've always in my whole life been a write the essay the night before it's due kind of girl. And what I didn't realize is I was relying on the fact that I just had good high school training. I'm a good writer, and I rested on my laurels for a really long time with that. I could pull it off, and I probably did it even with a few journal articles, and I'm sure I did it with my whole PhD. So like this process of a book forced me to go through several drafts and several iterations. And it's so much better than anything I think I've ever done. And how stupid is it? It's taken me half a century and all the schooling in the world to finally realize that. And actually, what Lynn just said, the perfectionism is what I think also gets in my way. Like, and I've said this analogy a few times. You know, I only started learning to sew in lockdown, and now I'm like to pretend I'm one of the cool makers, like many of the people here. And I am more than willing to wear an imperfect dress out in public, but I am not willing to put imperfect writing on my blog. And I've been trying to force myself to change that. Like, it is like the perfectionist thing, I think, is the worst thing for it. You'll never get it done, because I would sit and I would stare and I couldn't find the words and they weren't coming and the flow wasn't happening. So I always tell like my students and things, look, if you're really, really stuck and you can't write, go do something administrative, work on your images, work on your spreadsheets, figure out, all the other bits that you have to do. But like, it's just hard and it takes time. I know that sounds just really obvious, but I feel like we need to vocalize this a little bit more too. And and also, like, my peers got me through. These people right here definitely got me through. Hilary teaching me Scrivener got me through my second draft 100%. Like, that blew my mind and freed up my thinking. So tools, like Lynn said, with the mapping, for me, learning Scrivener was massive and helping me kind of revise my draft and everything. Anyway, I'm going to stop because I could go on and on this one, but it's hard. So don't beat yourself up if you're struggling, is what I want to say.
I think the other thing
I
that I add as well is don't have tons of pages on your desk of all the things that you want to be looking up and tons of books, because that's when you just get completely congested and you can't write. Best thing to do is just go out and have a walk and think about the structure, because it's amazing how you get those light bulb moments. That's when it comes.
Robin, just as you were mentioning Scrivener, Z in the chat was saying how much it helped them. And I'm evangelical about Scrivener, so I've put a link there to it's a program that's made by writers for writers, and it's the only program I've really found that sort of replicates the physical process of writing and allows you to move things around and be messy. So I just want to vocalize my support for that, because it really it changed my writing life. It's fantastic. So yeah. And also I would say that the analogy I often use when I'm writing, especially something really long like a book, is I think of that drafting process and the finishing process as two different things. And the metaphor I use is, first of all, I have to make the clay and then I have to shape it. And, if I'm sitting there being perfectionist in my head, I have to put things on a page because I can't shape and finish off this pile of words unless they actually exist. So I make the clay and then I shape the clay, and that kind of split process has also helped me to kind of get through a few blocks.
I'm sorry, I just have to dovetail on that, because the act of writing is a thinking process, and you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know until you start writing it. And often I tell my students too, I'm like, how do I start? Just start. Just put words down and do things like snack writing or just a 5-minute word dump. Put your timers on, whatever. But that's 100% right. I love the clay analogy. I'm stealing it, like I steal so many things of yours.
I just have to say, Lynn saying about not too many books open, I don't know if any, this is where I am right now. I have such good intentions when it comes to writing, and then it just goes kind of crazy. So for me, particularly with Address Diary, writing was about I had to find a discipline because I had a deadline that I was determined to meet. But the pandemic had happened, and at the same time I had 2 kids that I was homeschooling and I was teaching online, and I just had to be disciplined. I had to so what I ended up doing was I worked out, right, this is how many months I have to my deadline, this is how many chapters I have to write, this is based on the fact that I tend to write about 1,000 words a day. This is how many, I literally did a kind of mathematical, I went, right, I need to write this chapter in this many days in this month, and I have to do it, and that's what I did. So I didn't really have any time for procrastinating, and I mean there was plenty of that in at different times of day when I was thinking, but the kind of couple of hours that I would allot to myself to write each day, whilst the mayhem was going on the other side of this door of kind of teenagers and just madness, I just had to do it, and so I think sometimes is that, as others are saying, the idea that you just have to write, and whether or not it turns out to be good that day or not, it's something, and that's and I'm still kind of finding that now because I'm on deadline for my next book, and I'm kind of following the same process. This is how many chapters, this is how many months, this is how much I need to write a day. And so for me, that works really well. I'm not very good at things like Scrivener. I feel like I'm kind of missing a trick there. But yeah, for me, it's very much, I feel clearer in my head when I know how many words I have to write a day. And that makes me feel calm. I've got my structure, I've got my months written out. And sometimes it changes. Sometimes I'm like, oh God, I thought I was going to be able to write more this month and I haven't. But then I have to do a quick recalculation. And that really helps me to go, no, it's fine. I can still do it. I just need to do it there instead. And so, yeah, that kind of breaking it down into manageable pieces has always worked for me.
I'd say also the word count on a book really kind of keeps you honest, because again, when you start going down that rabbit hole and you're like, oh, I've only got this many words, can it? And then you can, it helps focus a bit. But sorry, Suzanne, I spoke over you.
Not at all. I was just going to add that I learned the hard way. And for my current book, I wrote a timeline to completion with grand plans, which I hope to stick to. But when I wrote this first book, I think I didn't realise how much work I needed to do at the earliest stages. So it was a bit of an inverted pyramid. I started out very slowly, and then towards the end, kind of don't realise how much the image captions and indexing and all that kind of thing, it takes so much time. I had to rope my whole family in, my teenage sons were helping me with things they knew nothing about, but they learned. So yeah, but a timeline like Kate, I learned. That's what I would suggest now as well.
That actually leads us into one of our next questions. I noticed it in the chat previously, and I know people are very curious about it, including me. Images and permissions, if you have recommendations, how did you sort of tackle this? I know, Lynn, you had mentioned this of a publisher saying that you could only have a certain amount of images. So that definitely played a role in self-publishing, but yeah, how do you deal with that? Because it can be so daunting and difficult, and it's sort of like an added step that is in the writing process that I feel like people don't always realize.
Well, I'll start then. Yeah, well, I've been really lucky because most of the images for my book I've actually managed to nobble from friends and institutions where I have worked or lectured. So I haven't had to pay very much really for images. It is a problem, there's no doubt about that. Yeah, and I would certainly say start thinking about the images from early on. Don't leave it to the last minute, because it's the images in a sense that, partly shape what you're writing, especially for the sort of work that I'm doing. Because I needed to be able to, what I did was just sort of budget, I'm going to have a certain number of images for each chapter, because that's what I wanted. When I approached publishers, I was told I could have 8 colored plates and I could have like 50 images. Well, I've got like 300 images plus in my book. So that was one of the reasons for going down this, say, the self-publishing route. And I have been very lucky that I have been provided with them. I think and also I'm not in an academic post, so I'm sort of going out there as an independent historian, and there is that sort of temptation, God, who are you? Kind of thing you might think. But I've tried to I think it's how you approach the individuals that you want to get the images from. Be very professional about it, explain a lot about what it is that you're trying to do with the publication, the importance of the piece that's in their collection. And it might be that actually, I've been very lucky with some of the private collections. I've actually identified pieces that they didn't know the importance of. So in a sense, it's a sort of give and take process. I'm providing them with information, and in return, they have given me photographs of the pieces that I've been working on or want to include in the book. So it's been really good from that point of view. But if you're self-publishing, you do need to set aside a certain amount of your own money, unless you've been lucky to get grants. And I have actually managed to get a couple of grants towards publication as well.
This is one of the key differences, technical differences between academic and trade publishing. And it's really good for people to know that, because academic publishing, like Kate said, is predicated, and I don't think it's, any coincidence that there's, you know, the word predator is in there somewhere, on the idea that academics all have institutional positions and that those institutional positions are supporting their research. So if you publish an academic book, it is very, very likely, you know, or 99% sure, you're not going to get any support for the images from the publisher, because it is assumed that there's, you know, a research grant you can apply to that the institution is supporting. So there's a lot of there are publication grants that you can apply for. If it's a trade publication, they often have an image budget, and what that budget is, you know, varies from publisher to publisher, but then they will pay for the images. And because Dress in the Age of Jane Austen was an academic book, and I was an honorary associate at the time, I did not have the academic budget. I got really, really good at finding free or cheap images. And again, I put them on my website as a resource. And in fact, I made a whole website just for academic images. So I'm going to put this in the chat, because another difference between the charges for things is often whether or not your book is academic or is a trade publication. And if your book is academic, or your journal article or whatever it is, you can often get stuff free. And more institutions are allowing you, you know, realizing the costs of maintaining an image library, and a lot of the charge is kind of built into administering the charges. So more and more people are doing free images, and I put together in this website, it's like just a WordPress, all the places that I find, and anytime anyone sends me another one, I just add it to there. But I also did on my website, this came out of a Twitter thread I did, which is tips for cheaper image permission costs. Someone in the chat earlier was asking about what are the rights if you own an object and you take a picture of it. Great, perfect. You know, you own that thing. And with the costs of image permissions rising, if there's things that are reproduced, so, you know, a fashion plate or you know, something from a magazine, it can often be cheaper to buy the thing on eBay or somewhere else, and then you have the thing and then you take an image of it. I've also found that especially Alamy, one of the big stock image providers, is actually a really great source for images, something that you might find on, say, a major museum site, that they want to charge you 150 to 500 pounds. You find on Alamy for like 80 pounds. So anyway, I've done a list on my website, which again, I've just put the link there, on things that I've found are tips to get cheaper images. And that was based on having to pay for all of my 200 images for the first book from myself while not being in an academic position. So if that helps other people, then yeah, I just want to share the fruits of the labor there, because it's a horrific cost. And, you know, if people can get things free, then all power to you.
Yeah.
Having done kind of both, sorry, Robin. Yeah, having done both. So that's a great tip from Hilary about eBay. You know, I was writing about somebody who had her photograph taken a lot in the 19th century for my PhD, and so I would just scour eBay and for like £5, £10 buy original carte de visite, so that I could then use that's my image, and then that saved me a lot. Because Getty, I remember getting a quote from Getty for 2 images for £1,500 for 2 black and white photographs. You know, it can be exorbitant. So eBay is a great tip. For the dress diary, most of my images came from Wikimedia Commons, so you can always just check there as a kind of and you can do a general search. So I was looking for some images around calico printing and just searched on Wikimedia Commons for calico printers, and then you can see which images exist that might be because they are copyright free, which images you can then fit. Sometimes it can work that way around. So that's how it's kind of worked out for me.
It's worth just checking on archive.org as well.
Alden was just saying that.
Print And I also, like Hilary and Kate, I mean, have used the eBay route. I've also used the AB books route, so that I have actually a library of all the embroidery books that were published in the 19th century, because it worked out cheaper for me to buy them than to try and get pictures from them. So that's been really helpful. And of course, it's a great source to have for not only for this book, but for other publications as well.
So if I can add to, can I?
Robyne, you go.
Thanks. Because I first the image thing is gave me the biggest fear of anything doing my book, and that was with me being employed in the end. Luckily for me, the institution that I was writing about, which gave me the boot halfway through my project, I should made me redundant. They agreed to honor my staff affiliation, so they didn't charge me for any images, and that's where the majority of my images were from. And I had thousands of images to sort through, and that was horrific, but they were at my disposal. Then I now work for the University of Glasgow, who also didn't charge me for images, but I still had lots of costs from other places. So luckily I had grants. I did get a Royal Society of Edinburgh grant and a Paul Mellon Center grant to cover it. And so luckily I didn't have to personally shell out anything, but I want to say two things on the back of this. One is that what I didn't know at the time, when we were going through kind of the production part of the book, and for myself at Yale, and I think other people as well have had this, certainly, we have these project managers that come in at the end and kind of get it all together, and you go over the book and you get your proofs, and they do the editorial and all of that kind of stuff. And so when we were looking for good images, and it turns out all the images of the building on fire that were really spectacular, very smartly, photographers sent straight to the Getty. So they were all expensive. And I was like, yeah, we're gonna have to buy that one. And she's like, leave it with me. We actually have a deal. So sometimes your publisher actually has an account with these places. They can get the image more cheaply. And we had worked it out that it would actually maybe come off of my whatever whatever meager money I might make from the book. But in the end, my grant was able to cover, I had enough. So your publisher can sometimes help you with that. So that was an important point I wanted to add, because I had no idea about that. The other thing too, I'm going to spin this slightly to the side, but I think this is really important. It sounds obvious, but Lynn has definitely shown this in The Independent. There's a cost against every single one of these books. They cost money to produce. And I found, sort of in my journeys, particularly looking for fashion more and more, I've been approached by publishers for artistic dress. And then they'll say, okay, well, the book costs £2,500. Let's find the money to do it. And that's for their generic, bespoke, they've got a template of how they produce these books. So you might find with some publishers lately that the books all kind of look alike in format and size and things like that, because they've got a template, they've got a cost against the book, and you fill that in basically. If you want something that's a bit fancier, more bespoke, then that cost goes up. And more publishers are going, right, where are we going to find the funds to do this, which is quite surprising. So Yale isn't necessarily doing that, but actually I did get a publication grant from the Paul Mellon Center, and then they got a publication support grant on the back of it too. So I just wanted to add that little point into this mix, that sometimes it's not even just the images, it's even making the book itself that we are now being asked to find the money for. Which, I was reminiscing with somebody who is a senior scholar, and she was like, I remember when there were researchers at the publisher who used to help you find the image, like all this stuff. I was like, oh my God, what was that like? Genuinely, I was like, it was just crazy. So I just wanted to, maybe it's a bit depressing, but throw in that these are these bigger things to think about, but that there are, you can get lucky and get grants, but that's just on top of all the amazing advice you've already had.
Yeah, well, can I just throw in there, my next book is with a major museum, and I had to find 50% of the funding for the publication. I was really lucky. In fact, there was a funding body that was prepared to stump up the £10,000, but the book would not have gone ahead if we hadn't been able to get match funding for it. So
I just want to pop in as well and say, something I've learned from doing 2 books now is that anytime I'm in an archive or a museum, I take pictures with the idea that if I need to use them for publication, I can. And this is a really helpful thing to get into, because the number of times I've gone, oh, wait, I've got the only picture of this thing and the lighting was a bit dodgy or my thumb's in the way. So now I'm really fussy about the lighting and things. Like, for example, the background behind me, that's an archive picture, and I ended up using a detail of it in Dress in the Age of Jane Austen. And museums have also been really good about letting me use those pictures. I'm upfront about it. So, I mean, there was an amazing picture in, say, Hatfield House that I was there as just on a visit, and I saw this picture. It had never been published, and I went, oh my God, this is perfect. I said, can I take a picture of this for publication? They let me in early to do it, and all they said was, just send us a copy of the book afterwards. So I've my photography has really improved, because or I might then email the museum and go, listen, I've got these 5 shots of objects. Do I have your permission to publish them? And it's kind of cut out a whole lot of stuff, and also means that I can then get objects that wouldn't have been published out otherwise. So, kind of a good camera that you can take with you, and just like some basics of photography can also save you a lot of money and time, because then you're also not asking the museum to rephotograph. And I found that really helpful to just keep that in mind as I'm researching.
Thank you. For the sake of time, we're going to move to the Q&A. Lots of comments and great suggestions in the chat. I didn't mention that at the beginning, but we're recording this session. It'll be posted to YouTube if you want to reference it. But just looking through the chat, maybe like a blog post or adding to our resources page, all these wonderful resources would be so great. So just put any questions you have in regards to writing. I guess as we wait for the questions to come in, I guess off of, oh,
Sorry,
yeah,
Mika,
Kate,
I was just going to say, one of the things that we're talking about writing books here, but one of the things can be, if you want to just make a start at something like a WordPress site or an Instagram post, and kind of hone your writing in unexpected places. That can be really, you don't have to feel that this is, I know we can talk about different kinds of writing at different times, but that can be a way into you starting to feel a bit more confident about your writing. Just think about your choice of words when you were doing an Instagram post or a blog post. So that can really help to make you feel a bit more confident about writing. So it can lead in unexpected directions, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, don't be intimidated about the idea that you have to write this opus in one go, but start with some ideas. It could even be that you start to kind of flesh out ideas for a future publication on a different platform. But yeah, just give it a go.
And Kate, as well, one of the joys of doing that and sort of talking about a project that's still in hand, like Lynn was saying she's talking about the project she's doing, is you also get to hear the questions from people or get the comments on the blog post, and you find out what it is they want to know. And if 5 people in 5 different talks ask you the same question, you're like, oh, actually, that's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about including that, but clearly that's what other people want to know, and it can really help the development of the book as well. Just kind of, building up slowly and getting feedback and response.
I would say if you're going to go down the self-publishing route, there are a couple of things I would throw in. One is you don't have an editorial team behind you that's going to look at your book and give you advice from that point of view. So you do need to set up a group of people round about you that you can send chapters out to, that can have a look at what you're writing. I find it really useful not only to have people in your subject area, but have somebody who knows nothing about your subject who's reading through it. Does this make sense to the lay person? Because that's incredibly valuable. The other thing I would say is if you're going down the self-publishing route, you need to have a good person who's going to work with you in terms of layout and in terms of printing. And I've been very fortunate in that regard that for the previous 2 books, I've worked with the same printer, typesetter and person who's laying out and designing the book with me. So I know that I can get what I want to the highest quality, but that's a really important thing that you need to sort out in advance.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to the last section. There were a few questions that I think we can do at the very last Q&A. That would be a good like wrap up. But Lynn, you had just mentioned this, and I feel like it ties into the marketing aspect for the cover. Like, how much say did each of you have in what ended up as the cover? We were just talking about images and permissions. Certain publishers obviously have, like we were talking about, a format for the cover, so you don't really have the ability to customize it per se. But how did you work with a designer or a printer? Did they tell you you needed a particular design, or were you pretty free to use a certain image or something?
I'll jump in and get it over with quick. They did it and I was just shown it and I went, yeah, that's great. Actually, luckily they did a good job. I know other people have had different experiences. So I wasn't that much involved, and I know, I don't know if we're going to talk about marketing. I had no idea what to expect it being my first book. And I've been thinking lately, I'm like, I haven't really done that much. And I know that's also been really different from other people. And like just a couple weeks ago, I did a book talk at Waterstones with someone who's a former student here of some of our lovely people who wrote this wonderful book on lesbian fashion. And she was with this small publisher and she was doing this tour all around the UK. And I was like, I didn't get to do that for my book. So, so there, we're talking about the joys of beautiful, and I love my beautiful academic book that's at a decent price point that's super affordable and looks absolutely gorgeous. But I've done F all, really, a couple talks that people have approached me for, and I've not done loads. So sorry, that was a bit of a split off, but I'm just spitting that out because I actually want to know the answer to this question from everyone else too. Like, help, should I be doing more?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in there, kind of covers two. So cover wise, because I was with Chatto, so Chatto is an imprint of that comes under the Penguin Random House kind of umbrella, and so they had their designers work on the book, and so much like Robyne, they presented me with a couple of design options, but they had their folk working on the actual cover, and I just had to sign off that I liked it. From the marketing perspective, I kind of had, again, this is so they hired a publicist to drum up opportunities for me, and I had a relentless, I think from January 2023 until August 2023, I was on a kind of relentless, I did 26 podcasts, I did 18 radio interviews, I did a book tour of the UK, this as at the same time of teaching. So it was pretty, so it was amazing. And I feel very, very lucky that they put that in place. I didn't have to source any of it. They built a diary and they said, right, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. And I kind of just turned up at the places. And I felt very fortunate that that was the case, but it was kind of that thing where you think, I'm sure I might have already said that, or did I say it yesterday to the other podcast person? And I don't know, I don't even know my name anymore. And so yeah, but it was amazing, and it was a very interesting to get, having had the academic experience where there wasn't anything, and it was kind of me just telling people that I passed in the street, oh hey, I wrote a book, to this very different experience with Chatto, where it just felt like this kind of juggernaut that I was just holding on to the back of it and clinging on for dear life. So that again is the difference between when you have a very motivated and well-resourced publisher who can do those things for you, I was very, very fortunate with that, and that made a big difference for me.
I would just say that in terms, excuse me, of the photographs and the presentation of the book, I put out a layout of exactly what I wanted it to look like or what I thought would work. And I took that to the printer and we talked together about what was, what would work in terms of printing and what wouldn't. And he came back with lots of suggestions and different colored pages to put in for different, to set off chapters and so on. So that was incredibly helpful. In terms of marketing, I mean, Kate was just so lucky having this publicist. I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. If you're going to go down the self-publishing route, make sure that you've got a plan. Don't just go ahead and publish the book and hope that somehow everybody out there is somehow going to hear about it. Really do set the plan in motion several months before you actually press on the print of the publication, so that you know what you want to do, and do get out there and contact editors of journals if it's an academic publication, so that you have promised and budget to have lots of extra copies. I mean, we always, with each of the books that we've published, set aside sort of 50 copies that were going to go out to editors of journals and so on, to persuade people to write reviews of the publication, because that's really important. That's a great way of advertising it.
That's what I was going to say, Lynn. Actually, reviews are really important. So places, especially that we all know, like the Costume Society's Journal, Association of Dress Historians, and elsewhere. I also did talks to museum groups, any interest groups. I think Norma asks which marketing events were most useful in generating sales. When I first started my Instagram account, I thought I would make it about my books, and that was useful, the publishers tell me, for sales, because my Edwardian book went into a reprint because of that. But another thing, one of the things that kind of made me nervous about writing the book was the Amazon reviewers, people you can't control who will have something to say about your work. But then, some were kind enough to be nice about it, and it gets picked up in specialist groups as well. And I think that's good as well. Word of mouth is helpful. And just in terms of the image, Crowwood Press are image driven. So I had quite a lot of say in the first book. I wrote another about the 20s, and they had more of an idea of what they wanted. So it was kind of a bit of both experiences.
I had a few images that I thought would work for the cover that I presented to Yale, that I'd sort of found as I was doing research along the way. And we wanted, it wasn't quite working. And sort of then all of a sudden I went, oh, what about this other image that would work? And suddenly we all just went, that's the one. So I kind of presented it to Yale, but then we all had to agree on it sort of editorially from the marketing people. Yeah, it's great. What I really like about the image on my cover is, I mean, all sorts of things about it. It's Jane Austen's own image of Jane Bingley, but it also was engraved by William Blake, and she's showing nipples. So I managed to sneak on some nudity there. So I was very pleased about that one. In terms of the promotion, like Robin said right back at the beginning, I've got a really sexy topic. Jane Austen is great, and I'm really lucky in that there's Jane Austen societies around the world, and especially in the English-speaking world where I live and work. So I get approached a lot to give talks on this book and the second book, podcasts, interviews, not nearly like Kate's grueling schedule, which I'm quite glad about. But so a lot of that is kind of driven by interest groups already from Jane Austen societies. But I would also say that I can often be a bit shy about actually approaching people to say, hey, do you want to talk? But you soon realize if you're on any sort of organizational board for events, it's great if you can have people coming to you and say, hey, I've got a book on this topic. I'd love to talk to your group. It's actually solves a problem for them of finding speakers. So I would really recommend to kind of contact any sort of group, society, organization who may have an interest in your topic and say, I'm doing this, would you like me to speak about it? Because it's one of those, if they don't know about it, they might not invite you, but you might actually be doing them a service. And yeah, so I think that's important too. But I've I've written about Jane Austen, which has its own like supercharged fan base, and so I've been useful in that. But you still have to, go to the festivals and give a good talk and do all sorts of things. So yeah, and I'd say as well to Norma's question about what's most effective. Robin said podcasts, and I find that it's podcasts that I get the most delayed reaction from. A year, 18 months afterwards, people go, oh, I just caught up on this episode of the podcast and I heard you and I didn't know you were there. So I think that kind of the tail, the slow burn of things as well is also really important. As Suzanne said, as the Amazon reviews build up, as word of mouth builds as well. I think especially for fashion studies topics where it's not kind of hot and fast bestseller, but if you can build up repeat sales, that's really useful for kind of keeping the book in print.
I would agree with Hilary that speaking to organisations and word of mouth is really helpful, because obviously there are so many embroidery groups out there, and the RSN is such a brand that's known worldwide that once you start speaking for one group and then word of mouth goes to another group and so on. So I've given tons of lectures already in advance of publication of the book. And a good thing to do is start keeping a list of people who show interest, who might want to publish your book, to purchase copies of your book. So I always say, would you like me to put you on a waiting list for the publication, and I will let you know when it comes out. So that's been really helpful as well.
I think some of you mentioned this, but on the topic of self-promotion, like Kate mentioned, all the sort of things you have to do as you're promoting a book. How proactive do you feel like you had to be? How much support did you get from a publisher, or Lynn, who's self-publishing? What is that process like? At what point did you start promoting the book? And if you feel like it, you could talk about how social media also plays a role. Suzanne and Kate mentioned this, sort of using Instagram and Twitter and things like that. If you were even like told by a publisher if you needed to use more social media when you were promoting your book.
I was given a kind of a timetable to follow. But I think, again, because I'd spent a long time on social media prior to the book, I'd got used to using it as a platform to share things more broadly. And it can be, I know that we're all well aware of the pitfalls of social media and the things that are less pleasant about scrolling on any of those platforms. But I always think dress history, Twitter and Instagram are the kind of lovely corners of social media. And so I still, I think they're a great place to promote all sorts of published works or events like ours. And yeah, so for me, it was, I did have lots of support, and I was very, very lucky for that. And I don't take that for granted for a moment. But all the same, it was still within that. I had to come up with a list of people that were going to come to the launch, for example, and then okay, so where are we going to who do we want to send this to in terms of reviews? So it was whilst they were kind of setting a timetable, I was still very active in the kind of direction and who I thought might benefit from an advanced copy or all of that kind of thing. So it's a definite, it was a definite two-way conversation there.
I certainly would recommend having a book launch if you're going to self-publish. choose your institution that you want to have the book launch at, and invite all the people that you really want to read this book, because that's really important. And we did that with both the May Morris and with the Needles Excellency. And that was great because it was a way to say thank you to people as well for their support along the way, but also to let other people know that the book is there and it's ready to be read and have copies available to sell. Really important.
I set up a Twitter account just for my book before I'd even finished publishing it, before I'd even finished writing it, so that I could kind of have something separate from my main social media feed there. I haven't done that on Instagram just because I don't like Instagram as much, but and then when I did the second book, I kept the same handle but just changed it to the second book. And Yale were really good about providing me kind of headers and things like that. But what Kate was saying, it again comes back to the book proposal. You're the expert in your topic, and you know who the people are in the field, who who the groups are, who the people are who write on this. So it's kind of it's contributing to the marketing and publicity is the same sort of thing as contributing the knowledge in the book, because it's often easier for the publisher to say, all right, who should we send this to? Because you can say, oh yeah, these three people, not that person, they don't really do this. And that, I think that's very helpful as well. I found Yale to be very helpful with publicity, definitely more for the second book than for the first book, because they went, oh, this Jane Austen actually sells, we'll put a bit more of a push behind it. And the feedback that I got from the marketing people there was they liked that I was available for the opportunities. So often things would come through them. They'd come through me and I'd run them to them, but they'd also get approached by people and say, can you do this? Can you do that? And I would sort of go, oh, okay, look, this is a bit tricky, but I can do this one. And so to be available for the opportunities they provided was quite good as well. Although, as I say, it's nothing like Kate's schedule. But by the second book, it was about 50-50, things coming from me and things coming through the publisher. And then we just worked together on them. And I found them very supportive as a resource, because it's sort of, you're all working for each other's benefit. Like Robyne was saying, the books have to sell. And yeah, so working together with the publisher is I found very positive. But that's So
Yeah.
I couldn't speak to other publishers.
So this is making me very self-reflective. I'm really loving this because I'm realizing, and I kind of knew it at the time, I was actually very afraid of my book coming out. I've sort of hinted at, and those who know, my subject was actually quite controversial in this little world of things. And my book came out on right around the 10th anniversary of the first fire. And so there was a lot of press here in Scotland around what's happening to the building. And there's a lot of drama, and there's still a lot of really angry people around this subject. And I was afraid of getting dragged into that. And I was also afraid that my book wasn't going to be good enough anyway, and everyone was going to hate it. And so actually, I think I lied low a lot. I did what people asked me to do some podcasts. I did them. I did talks. It's fun what Lynn said about the book launch, because I did have a book launch, and it wasn't about me selling the book. It was a party with my friends and the people who were involved in the book and who were really invested in this building and who'd supported me all along. And by the way, that was one of the best nights ever. I keep saying it was like a wedding, but it was only about me. And it was lovely. And I loved it. And I actually had it at the Glasgow Art Club because it was neutral ground. So I haven't actually been as actively engaged because I was afraid. If I'm dead on, I was afraid. And now actually I'm like, maybe I need to get back on it. It's only been out a couple months. And now it's good. And now it's shortlisted. And now maybe in the autumn, I need to do a second. And what was a bit weird for me though, is I thought in my head, surely I'll come to London and do something at RIBA. And that kind of hasn't transpired. And I feel like I need to be a bit pushy. Like I know I'm doing a talk with the Arts Society. Am I? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So there's a bit of a weird one, and boy, don't watch this, Yale. No, I love Yale. They've been absolutely amazing, but they seem to have this thing in their head that like Scotland wants it, but London doesn't care. And I'm like, no, are you kidding? Like, I haven't been asked to do anything in England, and I'm like, people love it was voted the most beloved building in the country. So meaning in the United Kingdom, actually, not just the country. So there's been a bit of that, and I have been a bit afraid, but I want to also address the question that just came up about endorsements while I've got the mic, because this was interesting. If this had been my artistic dress book, which I swear will be the next book, boy, do I know all the people to ask for endorsements. Like a lot of them are around here. But with architecture and design, I was a bit stumped. I was a bit like, actually, I don't think I know anyone. And hilariously, I do happen to, I think someone sorry, there we go. Oh no, someone's still, there we go. So anyway, sorry. So hilariously, I happen to have Simon Schama followed me on Twitter a while back, and I mentioned this in a haha passing, and my publisher was like, oh, can you DM Simon Schama and ask him for an endorsement? What? No, I can't DM Simon Schama on Twitter. But we ended up kind of having a brainstorm, and I mentioned Barry Bergdahl, who's a big professor at Columbia, and it turns out they had just worked on a project with Barry Bergdahl, so they asked him, and I have a beautiful endorsement from like one of the highest people in my field. And this was a really good lesson for me, because I think where you get your endorsements is many, many years before you ever write your book. When you go to conferences, when you go to events, create your network, speak to people, don't be afraid, start conversations, because it is hard to go out of the blue. And also the fact that I was asked, but it's like what Hilary said, because I'm the expert on my subject. So it's like, well, who do you think is the best person to go to? And you kind of have to provide names. And the same with marketing too. You give them ideas about who to ask. So sometimes it is that your publishers do have connections already, but there is a thing about what you have to do in that. So I think when you go out into your world is creating your network, don't burn bridges, all the things, because you never know many years down the road who that person is. And it did turn, I had actually met Barry Bergdahl once upon a time, very briefly, but I don't know that he would have remembered me. I think I got quite lucky. So I just thought I'd say that there is like, as much as I'm bullshitting out there, I've had a lot of fear around this book and putting myself out there and putting myself and asking people for stuff. It's hard, even when you're like someone like me. So anyway, that's all.
Just a minor point I would throw in: if you're going to self-publish, make sure that you've got an ISBN number for your book, because that's the way people will get in touch with you. Because I mean, I've already got booksellers coming to me saying, is this book coming out, because we know about it. And we certainly, it was one of the ways that we sold the other two books that I've worked on that have been self-published. So that's been very helpful.
The Crowood Press as well. Oh, sorry, they go to book fairs and they produce a catalogue, and they've got a website. So they did quite a lot of promotion for me as well. So I think all publishers will do that for you to some extent.
Thank you. Robyne, you answered one of the questions in the chat. I'll just pose it. So Pragya asked, any suggestions on how to approach people for endorsements? Hilary also answered, but if anyone else has some suggestions you think would be helpful.
I think just be bold. I mean, just ask someone. I get asked quite a lot now, and I think it's lovely. It's lovely to, particularly when it's a network, it might, and you know that it could be helpful. Be bold and approach someone that you think would be interested. You either won't hear from them, and that's the worst that can happen, is that you don't. So just be bold and figure out, okay, this could be somebody that would be a good fit for this book, and don't be afraid to ask. Yeah, that would be my advice.
I'm going to go back to an earlier question. Someone had asked it, and I thought it would be fitting to have more near the end. Z asked, I'm wondering, what did you enjoy the most about the whole process of writing and publishing a book? I mean, Robyne, you mentioned the wonderful book launch that you had to sort of celebrate.
Yeah, when it was over was when
Yeah.
I loved it the most. I think, I mean, doing research is lovely. I mean, it is lovely to go in and discover things, and that part is great. There were moments in the writing that I think I enjoyed, actually, when the flow was going and stuff like that. But I think in a reflective way, with the finished product, I actually feel like what I enjoy the most is my contribution to knowledge, if you will. I love the fact that I've put something into the world that adds to the conversation, and that even though I was writing largely about, I think, other people's work, so I was writing a lot of the history that's in the book is out there in other books. There's a necessity of kind of putting the contextual information. That's something, by the way, to think about too, that one wise person reader told me that when they go to read a book on a subject that they're an expert in, they expect to already kind of know 90% of it. And it's only about 10% of the new, because there's all this stuff and context and whatever. But anyway, but I would say that there are places where I was able to put in like my voice, my thoughts, my theories, my ideas, my research, my little bits into this larger body of work. And I think that's what I'm kind of most proud of it in the end, are those little places where I'm actually adding something to our, I keep saying body of knowledge. That's, we know it's such a cliched academic term, but it is. And I think that is, yeah, on reflection, the most exciting part of it.
For me, I love writing. I really love writing. I love the research as well. And so for me, actually the hardest part of the process is the point where you've submitted your first draft. And then, so I submitted my first draft in April 21, and the book came out in February 23. So then there's that period of time where you're editing, you're going through proofs, you're sorting image captions, you're doing all of that kind of really important kind of admin part of publishing. But I realized when I started writing as I am now, how much in that interim I missed writing, because there is that quite long period of time, nearly 2 years, where it becomes a bit more functional. And so for me, it's the research and writing is what I love. And then there's you just have this period where you're not able to do that. And I kind of I miss that when I'm not doing it.
I think for me, because mine is a making book, essentially, the best thing has been hearing from people who've made my projects, just people who've messaged me directly, or friends who've noticed something, online somewhere where somebody's remade a project, or, recently bumped into somebody who said, oh, I bought your 20s book and I remade this dress in it. It's just been so nice. That's been my favorite part of it.
I think for me, it's been sort of rehabilitating, in a sense, Lady Victoria Welby, because she kind of got written out of the history of the early history of the school. So it's putting her back centre stage, and it's great to be able to give her a voice. And so I feel that for me, that's something that's important that I have to do. And also for her descendant who wanted to give her a voice. So I feel that I'm writing it for him as well, because he's been so generous. So that's really helped. It's given me the impetus to carry on with the project. Unlike Kate, I hate writing. I love research. But you know, if I stop writing for a period of time because maybe I've got something else to do, God, I miss it. Despite the fact that it's really painful, I am actually glad, in a sense, to get back to it, even though sometimes it does really feel like it's pulling teeth. But it's great when it all sort of comes together. There's no doubt about that. I feel that it's something really special that we're allowed to do, and it's great to be able to share that information. I also find one of the processes of doing the research and the writing is when there's something that doesn't seem important to you, but for another scholar, suddenly it's the key bit of information that unlocks their story of what they're working on. And the same has happened for me, you know, things that I haven't been able to find out about. And I talk to somebody in a completely different field, and suddenly it's, oh my God, it's a light bulb moment, really, that just adds so much to your story. I find also, and I'm sure the others would say this, having an image of the person or the people that you're writing about is something to hold on to, and also having their voice in your head so that you're having a conversation with them. There are times I'd love to be the fly on the wall who don't have the conversation, say, why did you do that? Or why did you do it this way? But I think it's really important to have the image of that person front and center, so that you're always having that conversation in the process of writing. And you know, for this kind of book, when it's, you know, specifically a person and looking at an institution through her eyes, I have to always ask that question of her, though I might not always have the answer that I would like or hope for, but you know, one does one's best.
I put mine in the chat. Time.
That was good. I just want to add really quickly, it was really amazing to see a huge display in Waterstones with my book. That was also awesome. I couldn't believe it. That sounds so snotty, but it was really cool. And to see it in my favorite museums and in my university library, that was awesome. But again, that's all about it being done.
Oh, I just throw in there that if you are self-publishing, make sure that you give copies to the 6 copyright libraries, because we always do that. Make sure they've got copies of the book. That's really, really important. Something else to add to, along with, you know, who you send it out to when you want to have it reviewed.
Hey, I think I'm aware we're a little over the hour-and-a-half time point. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and like I said, for a student, it's lovely to hear everyone's suggestions and experiences, and I think it shows that there are a lot of different ways to go from a topic to publishing a book. And yeah, I just thank everyone for speaking and sharing everything. Like I said, this is going to be it's recorded, so we're going to upload it to our YouTube channel. I think there have been so many great suggestions, not only in the like panel conversation, but also in the chat. So be more than happy to transcribe and sort of list out the resources, because there are so many that everyone suggested. So yeah, I thank everyone for coming. I don't know if anyone else has any finishing thoughts before we end for today.
I'd like to just thank you, Nico, for being an excellent host. That you've been brilliant. Yes. But just also to say to everybody, please look out for our September event, which we hope will be a part 2 of highlighting university teaching collections in the United States. So more information to follow on that.
I also want to say that we decided to start with this kind of book discussion workshop as well, but we would like to have a similar format one on academic articles, journal writing, blogs, and kind of the smaller ways to publishing as well. So if that's something that you're interested in, we will be doing one of those in the future as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we're on a little holiday hiatus for August, so don't worry if you haven't seen an event, but we'll hopefully have the rest of the schedule out for the year. And Nico has been working amazingly hard behind the scenes, getting all the videos caught up on YouTube. So what we'll do for August is let you know when that's ready to go, and then you can just sit around whenever you want and watch all the back issues or shows. I don't even know the word I want.
Okay, I think yeah, we'll end it for today. Again, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. It was lovely to have this short chat with you all. I feel like we could talk about this. We could have so many sessions about this one topic, and like we mentioned, another publishing sort of workshop is in the works on journals and things like that. So I think that will also be very beneficial. So thank you for coming. Look out for future at-home events and the recordings on the YouTube channel. Yeah, thank you to everyone. Okay. Bye. Thank you, guys.